Hello, and a very warm welcome to Fireside Fables. If you're seeking stories that weave tranquility into your night, guiding you gently towards a restful slumber, you've found the right place. Here, we embark on journeys not just to distant lands and times, but into the heart of peace and calm itself. So, make yourself comfortable, let the day's worries melt away, and join me by the fireside. Together, we'll explore tales designed to soothe your mind, ease your soul, and escort you into the most peaceful sleep. Tonight, let the flickering flames and the soft cadence of our stories be your sanctuary. In the heart of the Scottish Highlands, as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, a gentle stirring occurred within a blooming heather bush, nestled deep within its protective embrace. The heather fairy slowly awakened from her peaceful slumber. The fairy's tiny form, no taller than a pinky finger, stretched languidly as she blinked away the remnants of her dreams, her delicate wings iridescent and gossamer. Flynn fluttered softly against the velvety petals that formed her bed. As she sat up, the fairy's long flowing hair, the color of honey and sunlight, she reached for a small comb fashioned from a thistle and began to gently work out the tangles, humming a lilting melody that seemed to resonate with the very essence of the heather surrounding her. The interior of her cozy home was a marvel of natural craftsmanship. Walls woven from intertwined heather stems created a snug shelter, while the purple blossoms overhead formed a living, breathing canopy. A tiny window, carefully crafted from dewdrops suspended in a spider's web, allowed the first gleams of morning light to filter through, casting a warm glow across the fairy's abode. Soft moss carpeted the floor, providing a plush surface for her bare feet as she rose and made her way to the window. Peering out, rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, their slopes adorned with a patchwork of heather, their peaks veiled in a gentle morning mist. In the distance, ancient mountains stood sentinel, their craggy silhouettes softened by the dawn's early light. A nearby loch reflected the awakening sky like a mirror, its surface occasionally disturbed by the jump of a fish or the graceful landing of a waterfowl. The air was crisp and clean, carrying with it the sweet scent of heather and the earthy aroma of the highlands. A light breeze whispered through the garden, causing the heather bells to sway gently, creating a soft tinkling sound like nature's own wind chimes. As the fairy stood at her window, breathing in the fresh morning air, she felt a deep sense of contentment wash over her. This hidden garden, tucked away in the Scottish wilds, was her sanctuary, her purpose, her home. With each new day came the joy of tending to this little slice of paradise, nurturing the plants and welcoming the creatures that called it home. The heather fairy closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the peaceful stillness of the early morning. She listened to the gradual awakening of her garden, the first tentative chirps of birds, the soft rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, the gentle unfurling of flower petals greeting the new day. With a soft smile playing on her lips, she turned from the window, ready to begin her daily rituals. The garden awaited her loving care, and as always, she was eager to provide it as she prepared to step out into the world beyond her heather home. The fairy paused for a moment, whispering a quiet thanks to the earth for another beautiful day in her highland haven. And so, with the dawn fully broken and the day stretching out before her like a blank canvas, the Heather Fairy embarked on another day of gentle stewardship in her secret garden, hidden away in the timeless beauty of the Scottish Highlands. As the Heather Fairy stepped out of her cozy abode, she was greeted by the cool, crisp air of the Highland morning. The world around her was still draped in the soft, misty light of dawn, lending an ethereal quality to her beloved garden. With a contented sigh, she began her morning rituals, a series of gentle tasks that prepared her for the day ahead. Her first stop was a large, cupped leaf that had collected the night's dew. This natural basin served as her bath, and the fairy approached it with reverence. She dipped a delicate toe into the crystal. Slowly, she lowered herself into the leaf, allowing the cool dew to envelop her. As she bathed, the fairy hummed a soft melodic tune, an ancient Gaelic song passed down through generations of Highland fairies. Her voice, barely louder than a whisper, seemed to blend with the gentle sounds of the awakening garden. Nearby flowers appeared to lean in, their petals unfurling a little more, as if to better catch the soothing notes. After her refreshing bath, the fairy fluttered her wings, sending droplets of water sparkling into the air like tiny diamonds. She alighted on a soft patch of moss to dry herself, basking in the growing warmth of the sun as it peeked over the distant mountains. Next came the task of grooming. The fairy reached for a delicate comb she had fashioned from the skeleton of a beech leaf. With slow, deliberate strokes, she worked it through her long, golden hair. As she did so, she weaved in small flowers and leaves, a sprig of lavender here, a tiny fern frond there, until her hair was adorned with the colors and scents of her garden. For her attire, the fairy selected petals from the previous day's fallen blooms. She draped herself in the soft silk of a faded rose petal, cinching it at the waist with a belt made from a slender blade of grass. Over her shoulders, she placed a shawl of delicate Queen Anne's lace, its intricate pattern providing both warmth and beauty. With her appearance tended to, the Heather Fairy turned her attention to breakfast. She flitted from flower to flower, collecting droplets of nectar in a tiny acorn cap. To this, she added a golden drop of honey from her personal store, kept safe in a miniature jar made from a hollowed-out rowan berry. Settling on a comfortable toadstool, the fairy sipped her sweet breakfast slowly, savoring each taste. As she did so, she observed her garden coming to life around her. Bees began their daily work, their gentle buzzing a soothing backdrop to the morning. A family of field mice emerged from their burrow, whiskers twitching as they sniffed the air. In a nearby tree, a robin began its morning song, its clear notes ringing out across the garden. As she finished her meal, the fairy took a moment to close her eyes and breathe deeply, inhaling the rich scents of her Highland home. With her morning rituals complete, the Heather Fairy felt centered and ready to begin her day of tending to the garden. She stood, stretching her arms wide as if to embrace the world around her. Her wings, now dry and glistening in morning light, quivered with anticipation. As she prepared to start her daily tasks, the fairy paused for a moment, her heart full of gratitude for the peaceful life she led in this hidden corner of the highlands. With a soft smile playing on her lips, she set off towards the heather patches, ready to begin her gentle work of nurturing and care. The day stretched out before her, full of promise and serenity, as the highland mist slowly lifted to reveal the full beauty of her secret garden. With the morning rituals complete, the heather fairy fluttered towards the expansive patches of heather that carpeted her highland garden. The soft purple blooms stretched out before her like a lavender sea, swaying gently in the breeze. This was her true passion, the heart of her garden, and she approached her task with a mix of reverence and joy. As she hovered above the heather, the fairy began her inspection. Her keen eyes scanned the plants, looking for any signs of distress or need. The sun, now fully risen, cast a warm glow over the garden, making the dewdrops on the heather sparkle like tiny amethysts. The fairy alighted on a sturdy stem, her diminutive weight barely causing it to bend. She ran her tiny hands over the leaves and flowers, feeling for any irregularities. As she worked, she hummed softly, an old Gaelic lullaby that seemed to make the plants stand a little taller, their colors a little brighter. "Good morning, my darlings," she whispered to the heather. She paused, as if listening to an inaudible response. A gentle smile played on her lips as she nodded, understanding the silent language of her beloved plants. Moving to a cluster that seemed a bit droopy, the fairy cupped her hands around her mouth and exhaled softly, her breath carrying a hint of magic that revitalized the tired blooms. Gradually, the flowers perked up, their purple hue deepening to a rich, royal shade. Next, she turned her attention to pruning. With utmost care, she removed dead or damaged stems, using a tiny pair of shears crafted from 2 thorns. Each cut was made with precision and love, encouraging healthy growth and maintaining the beauty of the heather patch. As she worked, the fairy sang softly, her voice blending with the gentle highland breeze. "Grow strong, grow tall, my heather dear. Your beauty brings such joy and cheer. Purple blooms and leaves so green, the loveliest sight I've ever seen." The simple melody seemed to resonate with the heather, causing a subtle shimmer to pass through the plants. It was as if they were swaying in time with her song, their bells tinkling softly in harmony. Throughout the morning, the heather fairy continued her tender ministrations. She cleared away fallen leaves and debris, ensuring each plant had ample space to thrive. Where the soil seemed dry, she summoned tiny rain clouds with a wave of her hand, providing a gentle mist to quench the heather's thirst. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm rays across the garden, the fairy paused in her work. She hovered above the heather, surveying her efforts with satisfaction. The entire patch seemed to glow with health and vitality. Before moving on to her next task, the fairy settled into a particularly lush section of heather. She lay back, allowing the soft blooms to cradle her tiny form. Closing her eyes, she breathed deeply, inhaling the sweet, honey like scent of the heather. In this moment of quiet reflection, the heather fairy felt a profound connection to her garden and the land around her. The gentle buzzing of bees, the soft rustle of the breeze through the heather, and the distant call of a soaring eagle all blended into a soothing highland symphony. As she rested, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, the fairy felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. This was her purpose, her joy, to nurture and protect this small corner of the Scottish Highlands. With each plant she tended, each bloom she encouraged, she was not just maintaining a garden, but preserving a piece of the wild, untamed beauty of Scotland. With a contented sigh, the heather fairy eventually rose, ready to continue her day of gentle stewardship. The heather swayed in farewell as she fluttered away, their bells chiming softly in gratitude for her loving care. The garden stretched out before her, full of life and beauty, a hidden paradise in the heart of the Highlands. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a warm glow over the highland landscape, the heather fairy set her sights on a new task. With a gentle flutter of her gossamer wings, she took to the air, leaving behind the comforting embrace of her beloved heather, her destination, the wildflower meadow that bordered her garden, a vibrant tapestry of color and life that required her nurturing touch. As she approached the meadow, the fairy was greeted by a symphony of colors. Bluebells nodded their heads in the gentle breeze, their delicate stems swaying like dancers in a silent ballet. Bright yellow buttercups turned their faces to the sun, drinking in its warmth. Delicate white stitchwort peeked out from between blades of grass, their star-like blooms a contrast to the lush green below. The heather fairy alighted on a sturdy thistle, Scotland's national flower, its purple crown standing proud above the other blooms. From this vantage point, she surveyed the meadow, her keen eyes searching for areas that needed her attention. "Hello, my colorful friends," she whispered, her voice carrying on the breeze. With that, she set about her work, moving from flower to flower with purpose and care. Her first task was pollination. Many insects performed this vital role, but the fairy's touch had a special magic that encouraged vibrant growth and resilience. She began with a cluster of forget-me-nots, their tiny blue flowers a favorite of hers. Gently, she collected pollen on her fingertips, the golden dust glowing faintly with fairy magic. With delicate precision, she transferred the pollen from one bloom to another, her touch as light as a butterfly's landing. As she worked, she hummed a soft, melodic tune. Moving on, she came to a patch of red clover. Some of the plants looked a bit wilted, their leaves drooping in the midday sun. The fairy cupped her hands around her mouth and blew gently, her breath carrying a hint of revitalizing magic. Slowly, the clover perked up, its leaves unfurling and reaching towards the sky. Throughout the afternoon, the heather fairy continued her gentle work. She tended to each type of flower with care tailored to its needs. For the delicate harebells, she summoned tiny clouds to provide shade from the intense sunlight. The sturdy yarrow received a sprinkle of fairy dust to encourage new growth. Each plant, no matter how small or common, received her full attention and love. As she neared the edge of the meadow, the fairy came across a small bare patch of earth. With a smile, she reached into a tiny pouch at her waist and pulled out a handful of seeds. These were special seeds, collected from the rarest and most beautiful highland wildflowers. With care, she scattered them across the bare earth, whispering words of encouragement as she did so. "Grow strong, grow true," she murmured. With a wave of her hand, she summoned a light mist to settle over the newly planted seeds, giving them the moisture they needed to begin their journey. As the afternoon wore on, the heather fairy found herself in the center of the meadow, surrounded by the fruits of her labor. The wildflowers stood tall and proud, their colors more vibrant than ever. Bees buzzed happily from bloom to bloom, their contented hum a testament to the health of the meadow. Feeling a sense of accomplishment, the fairy decided to take a moment of rest. She found a soft bed of moss nestled between a cluster of daisies and lay down, her tiny form nearly disappearing among the flowers. The warm sun caressed her face, and the gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of the meadow around her. As she lay there, the fairy reflected on the importance of her work. Each flower in this meadow played a crucial role in the highland ecosystem. By tending to this meadow, she was helping to maintain the delicate balance of nature in her beloved highlands. With a contented sigh, the heather fairy closed her eyes, allowing herself to be lulled by the gentle swaying of the flowers and the soft buzzing of bees. As the sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the fairy knew it was time to return to her heather home. She rose, stretching her wings, and took one last look at the thriving meadow. "Until tomorrow, my friends," she whispered to the flowers. Then, with a flutter of her wings, she took to the air, her heart full of joy and purpose, as she made her way back across her highland garden. As the afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows across the highland landscape, the heather fairy returned to the heart of her garden. She knew that this time of day brought special visitors. With a sense of anticipation, she began to prepare for their arrival. Fairy flitted from plant to plant, gently encouraging late, blooming flowers to open their petals. These evening blossoms would provide nectar for nocturnal pollinators and fill the air with sweet fragrances to welcome the garden's guests. "Come, my pretties," she coaxed a cluster of evening primrose. "It's time to greet our friends." As if responding to her gentle urging, the primrose unfurled its delicate yellow petals, releasing a subtle, enchanting scent into the air. Next, the heather fairy turned her attention to preparing small treats for her animal visitors. She gathered fallen berries, carefully selecting the ripest and juiciest ones. With nimble fingers, she wove baskets from slender grass stems, lining them with soft moss before filling them with her berry collection. As she worked, she hummed a quiet melody, an ancient tune that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath her. The garden around her seemed to still, as if holding its breath in anticipation of the evening gathering. Just as the fairy placed the last basket near a small clearing, she heard a rustle at the edge of the garden. Turning, she saw a young roe deer cautiously stepping out From the shadows of the surrounding forest, the deer's large liquid eyes scanned the area before settling on the tiny fairy. "Welcome, gentle one," the fairy called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come, enjoy the peace of the garden." The deer's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but something in the fairy's presence seemed to calm the creature. Slowly, gracefully, it made its way into the clearing, lowering its head to nibble at the tender shoots of grass the fairy had encouraged to grow. As if the deer's arrival was a signal, other creatures began to emerge. A family of rabbits hopped into view, their noses twitching as they caught the scent of the berries. A red squirrel scampered down from a nearby tree, its bushy tail twitching with excitement. The heather fairy fluttered from guest to guest, offering words of welcome and gesturing towards the treats she had prepared. Her presence seemed to cast a spell of tranquility over the gathering, allowing natural predators and prey to coexist peacefully within the boundaries of her garden. A soft hoot announced the arrival of a tawny owl who perched on a low-hanging branch, its wide eyes taking in the scene below. The fairy floated up to greet it, offering a small handful of seeds she had collected earlier. "Good evening, wise one," she said, her voice filled with respect. "I hope you find rest here before your nightly hunt." The owl blinked slowly in response, accepting the seeds with a gentle nip of its beak. As the evening progressed, more animals arrived. A badger waddled in, heading straight for a patch of earthworms the fairy had encouraged to surface. A pine marten slunk gracefully through the undergrowth, pausing to lap water from a small stream the fairy had directed to flow through her garden. Throughout it all, the heather fairy flitted from creature to creature, her presence a soothing balm. She whispered words of encouragement to a limping fox, her touch easing its pain. She sang a soft lullaby to a nest of newly hatched song thrushes, her voice blending with the evening chorus of birds. As twilight deepened, casting a purple hue across the sky, the fairy found herself in the center of the clearing. Around her, the woodland creatures rested peacefully. The young deer lay in a patch of soft grass, its legs tucked beneath it. The rabbit family huddled together near a clump of heather, their ears twitching occasionally. Even the owl had settled more comfortably on its branch, its eyes half closed in contentment. The heather fairy looked around, her heart swelling with joy and purpose. This was why she tended her garden with such care, not just for the plants, but for these creatures who found sanctuary within its borders, in a world that could often be harsh and unforgiving. She had created a haven of peace and harmony. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, the fairy raised her arms, her wings spreading wide. In a voice that seemed to carry the very essence of the highlands, she began to sing a blessing. "Rest easy, creatures of fur and feather. In this garden, we find peace together. From the smallest mouse to the wisest owl, all are welcome, no need to prowl. May your dreams be sweet, your hearts be light, protected and loved throughout the night." As her song faded, a sense of deep tranquility settled over the garden. The heather fairy smiled, knowing that her evening task was complete. She had welcomed the woodland creatures, offered them sustenance and safety, and now it was time for her to prepare for her own rest. With a final look at the peaceful gathering, the fairy fluttered towards her heather home, her heart full of love for the highland wilderness and all its inhabitants. As she went, the evening primrose seemed to nod in farewell, their petals glowing softly in the gathering darkness, a final good night to the fairy who tended this magical highland garden. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the highland landscape, the heather fairy turned her attention to a vital feature of her garden, the babbling brook that wound its way through the heart of her domain. With a gentle flutter of her wings, she made her way to the source of the stream, a clear spring that bubbled up from between moss-covered rocks. The fairy alighted on a smooth stone at the water's edge, her tiny feet barely dimpling the surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the brook's song, a melody of gurgles, splashes, and soft murmurs that spoke of life and renewal. "Hello, old friend," she whispered to the stream. The water seemed to burble in response, and the heather fairy smiled, understanding the silent language of her garden. She began her work at the spring itself, carefully removing fallen leaves and twigs that had accumulated since her last visit. Her touch was gentle, yet purposeful, ensuring the water's flow remained unimpeded. As she worked, she hummed a soft tune, an ancient Highland ballad that seemed to make the water sparkle with renewed vigor. Moving downstream, the fairy flitted from bank to bank, her keen eyes searching for any areas that needed her attention. She paused at a bend where the current had eroded the bank, threatening to undercut the roots of a young rowan tree. With determination, she set about her task. First, she gathered small stones from the stream, carefully selecting those that would fit snugly against the eroded bank. One by one, she placed them, using a mix of physical effort and fairy magic to secure them in place. Between the stones, she planted tufts of grass and water, loving flowers, their roots helping to bind the bank together. "Grow strong and hold fast," she murmured to the plants. "Your strength will protect both land and water." As she worked, the heather fairy noticed the stream's inhabitants going about their daily lives. A group of minnows darted between the shadows, their silver scales flashing in the dappled sunlight. A water vole poked its head out from its bankside burrow, whiskers twitching as it watched the fairy's progress. Nearby, a dipper bird hopped from stone to stone, searching for insects in the flowing water. The fairy paused in her work to greet each creature, her presence a calming influence on the brook's ecosystem. To the minnows, she whispered encouragement to grow strong, and for the dipper, she stirred up the riverbed slightly, bringing tiny insects to the surface for easy pickings. As she moved further downstream, the heather fairy came across a fallen branch that had created a small dam, disrupting the brook's flow. With careful consideration, she assessed the situation. While the pooled water behind the branch had created a new microhabitat, she knew the overall health of the stream depended on its uninterrupted flow. Gently, she began to shift the branch, not removing it entirely, but repositioning it so that water could flow freely around it. As she did so, she spoke softly to the creatures, that had made their home in the temporary pool, assuring them that change, while sometimes challenging, was a natural part of life in the garden. "Flow free, little stream," she said, her voice blending with the sound of the water. "Carry life and vitality through our garden." As the afternoon wore on, the heather fairy continued her journey downstream. She cleared away debris, encouraged beneficial plants to grow along the banks, and used her magic to reinforce areas where the current ran strong. All the while, she sang to the brook, her voice a melody of love and care that seemed to make the water dance with joy. Near the point where the stream left her garden, joining a larger river beyond, the fairy paused for a moment of reflection. She hovered above the water, watching as it sparkled and gurgled its way over smooth stones. In the clear depths, she could see the vibrant life her care had nurtured. Water plants swaying gently in the current, tiny creatures darting among the pebbles, even the glint of a trout's scales as it rested in a deep pool. The heather fairy felt a profound sense of connection to this life-giving water. It was more than just a feature of her garden. It was a vital artery, carrying nourishment and vitality to every corner of her domain. Its song was the heartbeat of the land, a constant reminder of the cycles of nature and the interconnectedness of all living things. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the fairy realized her work was done for the day. She had tended to the brook with love and care, ensuring its health and the well-being of all the creatures that depended on it. With a contented sigh, she alighted on a water-smoothed stone in the middle of the stream. Closing her eyes, she offered a quiet blessing to the brook. "Flow on, sweet water, through meadow and glen. Bring life to the land, time and again. From tiny spring to mighty sea, carry our love and be ever free." As if in response, the brook seemed to burble more cheerfully, its song a promise of continued life and renewal. The heather fairy smiled, her heart full of joy and purpose. The babbling brook continued its journey, a silver ribbon winding through the highland landscape, singing its eternal song of life, change, and the enduring magic of nature. As twilight began to settle over the highland garden, painting the sky in deep purples and warm oranges, the heather fairy emerged from her home once more. This was a special time in her garden, a magical transition, when day slowly gave way to night. It was the hour of the evening bloom, when certain flowers awakened to greet the approaching darkness. The fairy hovered for a moment, her wings catching the last rays of the setting sun, casting shimmering patterns on the ground below. She took a deep breath, inhaling the changing scents of her garden. The air was filled with a mixture of fragrances, the lingering sweetness of day, flowers mingling with the first hints of night blooming species. "It's time, my nocturnal beauties," she whispered to the garden. "Let's welcome the night together." With a gentle flutter, she made her way to a patch of evening primrose. These delicate yellow flowers had remained tightly closed throughout the day, but now, as if by magic, they began to unfurl their petals. The heather fairy watched in wonder as each bloom slowly opened, releasing a sweet, lemony scent into the air. "There you are," she cooed, gently caressing a petal. Moving on, she came to a cluster of night, scented stock. These unassuming plants had been easy to overlook during the day, but as night approached, they prepared to release their intoxicating fragrance. The fairy hovered close, whispering words of encouragement. "Release your sweet perfume, dear ones. Let it dance on the evening breeze." As if in response to her words, the flowers began to emit their rich, clove-like scent. The fairy smiled, knowing that this aroma would attract night, flying moths, vital pollinators in her garden's ecosystem. Next, she approached a stand of moonflowers, their large white buds still tightly closed. These flowers required a bit more coaxing. The heather fairy gently touched each bud, infusing it with a spark of her magic. "Wake up, my luminous friends," she murmured. Slowly, dramatically, the moonflowers began to open. Their enormous white petals unfurled like celestial trumpets, their faces turned towards the rising moon. As they opened, they released a rich, tropical fragrance that seemed to transform the highland garden into an exotic paradise. As she tended to the evening bloomers, the fairy was acutely aware of the changing light. The sky darkened further, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. It was time for the final touch. From a pouch at her waist, the heather fairy retrieved a handful of special seeds. These were the offspring of a magical plant that produced bioluminescent blooms. With care, she scattered the seeds in strategic locations throughout the garden, near pathways, under trees, and beside the babbling brook. As the seeds touched the earth, they immediately sprouted, growing at an accelerated pace. Within moments, delicate stems rose from the ground, topped with glowing, bell-shaped flowers. These living lanterns cast a soft, ethereal light across the garden, creating pools of gentle illumination. "Shine bright, little ones," the fairy encouraged. With the illumination in place, the heather fairy took a moment to survey her work. The garden had transformed into a nocturnal wonderland. Evening primrose and moonflowers glowed in the starlight, their pale petals luminous against the deepening shadows. The air was heavy with the mingled scents of night blooming flowers, creating an invisible tapestry of fragrance. As she hovered, taking in the beauty of the scene, the fairy became aware of the garden's nighttime inhabitants emerging. An owl hooted softly from a nearby tree, while bats began their nightly dance, flitting from flower to flower. Moths with intricately patterned wings were drawn to the night, scented blooms, their delicate movements a ballet in the gentle glow of the bioluminescent flowers. The heather fairy's heart swelled with joy and pride. This nighttime aspect of her garden was just as vital, just as beautiful as its daytime face. It was a reminder of the constant cycles of nature, the eternal dance of light and dark, sleep and wakefulness. As the moon rose higher, casting its silver light across the highland landscape, the fairy decided to take one last tour of her nighttime realm. She flitted from bloom to bloom, checking that each flower was fully open, each scent released to the night air. At the edge of a moonlit glade, she paused, hovering in a shaft of moonlight, raising her arms to the star-studded sky. She began to sing a lullaby to her garden. Her voice, soft and melodious, carried on the night breeze a song of gratitude and love for this magical place. Night falls gently, stars appear, evening blooms, your time is here. Perfume the air, shine in the light, dance with the moths throughout the night. Sleep now, day flowers, rest your heads, while moonbeams bless your quiet beds. Cycle eternal, dark and bright, my garden thrives in day and night. As her song faded, a peaceful silence settled over the garden. The heather fairy smiled, knowing that her work for the day was complete. She had guided her beloved garden through the transition from day to night, ensuring that life and beauty continued to thrive even in the darkness. With a contented sigh, she turned towards her heather home. As she flew, the bioluminescent flowers seemed to bow in her wake, their gentle light of farewell until the next evening. The night-blooming flowers stood proud and beautiful, ready to keep their vigil until dawn. The heather fairy's heart was full as she reached her home. She took one last look at her moonlit garden, marveling at its serene beauty. Then, with a yawn and a stretch of her delicate wings, she prepared for her own rest, ready to dream of the wonders that tomorrow would bring to her beloved Highland Haven. As the last vestiges of twilight faded into the velvet darkness of night, the heather fairy emerged once more from her cozy home. The highland sky above was a canvas of breathtaking beauty, with countless stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across a dark, silken cloth. The moon, a luminous crescent, hung low on the horizon, casting a soft, silvery glow over the garden. The fairy hovered for a moment, her wings catching the starlight and shimmering with an otherworldly iridescence. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool night air, rich with the mingled fragrances of evening blooms and earthy highland soil. This was a special time, a sacred moment, when the fairy would perform one of her most cherished duties, the Starlight Serenade. It was an ancient tradition, passed down through generations of Highland fairies, a way of connecting the earth to the heavens and blessing the garden with celestial energy. With a gentle flutter, the heather fairy made her way to the center of the garden, where a small circular clearing lay bathed in starlight. Soft moss carpeted the ground, creating a natural stage for her performance. As she alighted in the center of the clearing, she closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself and connecting with the energy of the land and sky. When she opened her eyes, they seemed to reflect the very stars above. She raised her arms, her delicate fingers reaching towards the heavens, and began to sing. Her voice, clear and pure as a mountain stream, lifted into the night air. O stars that shine in highland skies, your light in darkness never dies. From earth below to realms above, we send our thanks, we send our love. As she sang, a gentle breeze stirred, carrying her voice to every corner of the garden. The night, blooming flowers seemed to turn their faces towards her, their petals quivering in response to her melody. Even the creatures of the night, the owls, the bats, the moths, paused in their activities to listen. The fairy's song continued, weaving ancient Gaelic words with the language of nature itself. She sang of the eternal dance of the stars, of the cycles of the moon, of the deep magic that flowed through the highland soil. Her voice rose and fell, sometimes as soft as a whisper, other times as strong and clear as a bell ringing through the glens. As her song progressed, something magical began to happen. Tiny motes of light, like earthbound stars, began to rise from the ground around her. They swirled in the air, dancing to the rhythm of her song, creating patterns that mirrored the constellations above. The heather fairy's wings began to glow, pulsing with a soft light that matched the cadence of her song. She lifted off the ground, hovering at the center of the swirling lights, her arms still raised to the sky. Her voice took on an otherworldly quality, bridging the gap between earth and sky, mortal and magical. From the edges of the garden, curious woodland creatures emerged to witness the spectacle. A family of deer stood in silent awe at the edge of the clearing. Rabbits peered out from their burrows, their ears twitching in time with the fairy's song. Even the ancient trees seemed to lean in closer, their leaves rustling a soft accompaniment. As the serenade reached its crescendo, the fairy's voice soared to the heavens. Stars above and earth below, bound together in cosmic flow, bless this land with light and love. As below, so up above. With these final words, the swirling lights around her shot upwards, like a reverse rainfall of starlight. They merged with the stars above, creating a momentary bridge between the garden and the cosmos. For a breath, a heartbeat, the entire garden seemed to glow with celestial light. Then slowly, gently, the light faded. The heather fairy descended, her feet touching the soft moss once more. The garden settled into a profound, peaceful silence, as if the very air was holding its breath in reverence. The fairy stood still for a moment, her eyes closed, feeling the reverberations of her song echoing through the land. When she opened her eyes, she saw that her serenade had left its mark on the garden. The night, blooming flowers seemed more vibrant, their scents sweeter. The moss beneath her feet had a subtle glow, as if it had absorbed some of the starlight. Even the air felt different, charged with a subtle magic that would nourish the garden for days to come. Slowly, the nighttime residents of the garden returned to their usual activities. The owl resumed its silent hunt. The bats continued their aerial dance among the flowers. But there was a new peace, a deeper harmony that permeated every leaf, every blade of grass, every grain of soil. The heather fairy smiled, her heart full of love for this land and all its inhabitants. She had fulfilled her role as a bridge between earth and sky, mortal and magical. Her starlight serenade had renewed the garden's connection to the cosmic forces that watched over it. With a contented sigh, she began to make her way back to her heather home. As she flew, she trailed her fingers over the flowers and leaves, leaving a faint trail of stardust in her wake. It was her final blessing for the night, a promise of sweet dreams and renewal. As she reached her home, the heather fairy paused for one last look at her beloved garden. Under the starlit highland sky, it seemed to pulse with a quiet, magical energy, a reminder of the ancient forces that flowed through this land and of her own small but vital role in maintaining that flow. With a heart full of gratitude and wonder, the fairy retreated to her home, ready for her own rest. She knew that tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, and new joys. But for now, under the watchful eyes of the stars, her garden slept, renewed and blessed by her starlight serenade. As the deepest part of the night settled over the highland landscape, the heather fairy prepared for her final task of the day. The moon had risen high in the sky, casting a soft, silvery glow over the garden. The stars twinkled overhead, their light a gentle reminder of the cosmic serenade that had blessed the land earlier. The fairy emerged from her heather home, her wings catching the moonlight and shimmering with an ethereal glow. She hovered for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene before her. The garden was quiet now, save for the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze and the occasional soft hoot of an owl. "Time for the final rounds, my dear friends," she whispered to the garden, her voice barely louder than the breeze. With a gentle flutter, she began her nightly ritual of bidding goodbye to each part of her beloved domain. This was more than just a simple check. It was a way of connecting one last time with every living thing under her care before they all settled into the deep rest of the highland night. Her first stop was the heather patch, the heart of her garden. The fairy glided low over the purple blooms, now silvered by moonlight. She trailed her fingers lightly over the delicate flowers, whispering words of love and gratitude. "Rest well, my beautiful heather," she murmured. Moving on, she visited the wildflower meadow. The day, blooming flowers had closed their petals for the night, while the evening primrose and night scented stalk continued their nocturnal vigil. The fairy paused to straighten a bent stem here, to brush away a fallen leaf there, her touch as light as a moth's wing. "Sleep tight, little ones," she said to the slumbering daisies and buttercups. "And to you, my night bloomers, keep watch over your sleeping friends." Next, she made her way to the babbling brook. Its song was muted now, a soft gurgle that provided a soothing backdrop to the night. The fairy skimmed her hand over the water's surface, creating tiny ripples that sparkled in the moonlight. "Flow on, sweet water," she whispered. As she continued her rounds, the heather fairy paid special attention to the creatures of the garden. She peeked into rabbit burrows, ensuring their occupants were safely tucked away. She checked on the deer family, now sleeping peacefully in a moonlit glade. Even the tiniest inhabitants, the insects and spiders, received her careful consideration. Near an old oak tree, she found a hedgehog foraging for a late-night snack. The fairy smiled, conjuring a small handful of berries for the prickly creature. "Here you are, little one," she said softly. "A midnight treat to fill your belly before sleep." The hedgehog blinked up at her gratefully before turning its attention to the unexpected feast. As the night deepened, the fairy could feel the garden settling into a profound state of rest. The energy of the day had dissipated, replaced by a deep, restorative calm. Finally, the heather fairy made her way to the ancient rowan tree that stood at the heart of the garden. This tree, older than any other living thing in the area, was like a wise guardian watching over the land. The fairy alighted on one of its gnarled branches, placing her tiny hand against its rough bark. "Thank you, old friend," she whispered, "for your strength, your wisdom, and your unwavering presence." She could almost feel the tree's response, a deep, slow pulse of life that resonated with her own heartbeat. As she sat there, the heather fairy looked out over her domain one last time. In the soft moonlight, the garden seemed to glow with a quiet magic. The bioluminescent flowers she had planted earlier cast pools of gentle light, creating an ethereal landscape of shadow and illumination. With a contented sigh, the fairy realized that her work for the day was truly done. She had nurtured, tended, welcomed, and now bid good night to every part of her beloved garden. It was time for her own rest. Rising into the air once more, she hovered above the garden. Raising her arms to the star-studded sky, she offered a final blessing. "Gentle night, embrace this land. Hold it safe in your velvet hand. Stars above, moon so bright, watch over all till morning light. Sleep now, garden, dream sweet dreams of sunlit days and babbling streams. Till dawn breaks and night is done, rest in peace, my precious one." As her words faded into the night air, a sense of deep peace settled over the garden. It was as if every leaf, every blade of grass, every sleeping creature had heard her blessing and responded with a collective sigh of contentment. Satisfied that all was well, the heather fairy made her way back to her own home, nestled within a blooming heather bush. As she approached, she could feel the pull of sleep, the weight of a day well spent settling into her tiny bones. Inside her cozy abode, she prepared for her own rest. She sipped a small cup of dewdrop tea, its subtle sweetness a final taste of the garden's bounty. Then, settling onto her petal, soft bed, she closed her eyes. As sleep began to claim her, the heather fairy's thoughts drifted over the events of the day. The tending of the heather, the dance of the wildflowers, the song of the brook, the visits from woodland creatures, and the magic of the starlight serenade. A smile played on her lips as she realized, once again, how blessed she was to be the caretaker of this highland haven. With the gentle sound of the night breeze whispering through heather bells, as her lullaby, the fairy drifted off to sleep. Her dreams were filled with visions of her beloved garden, a tapestry of color and life woven with threads of love and magic. And so, as the heather fairy slumbered, her garden slept too. The highland night cradled them all, fairy, flowers, trees, and creatures, in its peaceful embrace, until the first light of dawn would herald the beginning of another magical day in this hidden corner of Scotland. Thank you for allowing Fireside Fables to be a part of your journey tonight. We hope our story has gently guided you to the gates of dreamland, wrapping you in the comfort of tales told by the fireside's warm glow. For those of you who might still be seeking the embrace of sleep, stay with us a little longer. A calm, meditative piece will follow shortly, designed to ease you into a restful slumber under the watchful care of the night's peaceful embrace. Remember, the path to dreamland is always here, lit by the soft light of our fireside tales. May you find tranquility, peace, and the sweetest of dreams. Until next time, good night, and let the gentle rhythm of the night cradle you to sleep. Close your eyes and settle into a comfortable position. Whether you're lying down or seated, allow your body to relax completely. Take a deep breath in, filling your lungs with air, and then gently exhale, releasing all the tension from your body. This meditation will guide you into a deep, restful sleep. As you follow along, let my words be the gentle waves that guide you into the peaceful embrace of slumber. Begin by focusing on your breath. Feel the natural rhythm of your inhale and exhale. With every breath, imagine a wave of relaxation sweeping over your body. Starting from the top of your head, let this wave of calm flow down to your toes, relaxing each part of your body one by one. Now, bring your attention to your mind. Visualize your thoughts like leaves floating on a gentle stream, drifting further away with each breath. There's nothing for you to do right now, nowhere you need to be, except right here in this moment of peace. As your body sinks deeper into relaxation, imagine a soft, warm light enveloping you. This light brings with it a deep sense of calm, filling every corner of your being. With each breath, this light grows brighter, your body feeling lighter. It's now time to let go completely. Your serene place is here to cradle you into deep sleep. With every breath, feel yourself drifting further into this haven of peace. You are safe, you are loved, and you are embraced by the gentle arms of sleep. As my voice fades away, let the calmness and peace you feel guide you into a deep, restful sleep. Your body knows what it needs, and it's time to surrender to the soothing rhythm of your breath, to the quiet of your mind, and to the warmth of your peaceful place. Release all hold on consciousness and allow yourself to sink into the depths of sleep. Here, in this space, healing and rejuvenation happen effortlessly. Let go and let sleep envelop you in its comforting embrace.